So what happens when one of gaming's most legendary franchises launches a brand new entry and it flops? Welcome to today's video where we're going to be talking about exactly that. Doom: The Dark Ages, the latest installment in id Software's iconic first-person shooter series, and why it's currently underperforming on Steam despite the franchise's celebrated history. We'll be exploring the numbers, the reactions, the Game Pass factor, and what this could mean for Doom's future overall. Stick around, this is going to be an interesting one. So special shout out to all of you 88,300 plus legends out there that are subscribed to this channel right now, and the almost 48% of you that are not subscribed to this channel. Consider hitting that subscribe button today. I would greatly appreciate it. So let's go back in time really quick and talk about the recent history of Doom. When Doom was reborn back in 2016, many thought that it would be a generic reboot, something that was turned into essentially the most adrenaline-pumping, fast-paced FPS games of the decade. Doom Eternal would follow that game in 2020 with an even greater success than the first one. It became critically acclaimed, every single gamer loved it, it was financially profitable, and it had a peak of over 100,000 concurrent players on Steam. Doom was back in full force and everybody was loving it. So when Doom: The Dark Ages was revealed, fans have every reason to be hyped. Everybody was excited about it. I was excited about it. It was a new setting, a medieval-inspired twist. The Slayer is in brutal new armor. He had a chainsaw shield. It was insane. But then basically what ended up happening was excitement kind of fizzled out, especially with a little bit of drama that surrounded the video game for a multitude of reasons. What eventually ended up happening was, quite frankly, it's not looking that good. So let's look at the facts. Let's look at the actual numbers and see what is going on to start this video with. So let's look at the data. Upon release, Doom: The Dark Ages struggled to hit even 30,000 concurrent players on Steam. That is a massive drop from Eternal's launch. Review scored hovers somewhere around the 70s, forums filled with divided opinions, and most telling, players started refunding the game at an alarming rate. The $70 price tag became a huge sticking point, especially for PC players who are used to high-value offerings and often expect more competitive pricing, especially for digital distribution with no physical overhead whatsoever. Compared to past Doom games, this was a steep decline. Doom 2016 and Eternal had momentum. This game, not so much. So what happened? Well, I have a couple of theories as to what overall went down with this particular video game. The $70 price point I feel like is a huge factor for it. The reason why is because, number one, this game is available on Game Pass, but as it has been proven with previous games like Stalker 2, for example, or recent games like Oblivion Remastered or even Expedition 33, Game Pass is not an instant means to kill your game. It only is if the game is bad enough that people don't want to take it home. And ultimately, the $70 price tag, I think, is one of the biggest deciding factors as to why this game is not doing that well. On top of the fact of Doom having insane PC requirements. The requirements on Doom: The Dark Ages is so high that people are wondering what the hell they even did to optimize this particular video game. Sure, people are going to say, well, stop being poor. I have a 4090, 64 gigs of RAM, all that stuff, and ran the game perfectly fine. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to run around and not acknowledge that people with mid-tier PCs are struggling to run this game at anything other than 1080p at this point. They can't even bother to decide to go to 1440p unless they lower the graphics so much to make them able to actually do so. I also think competition is a huge factor here. As I mentioned earlier, Expedition 33 came out recently for 30 to 60 hours of gameplay, and that was a $50 video game. Oblivion Remastered, you could live in Oblivion Remastered, and it came out at a $50 price tag. Two major RPG games that give you 30 to 60 hours plus of content came out at a retail price of $50. And in all actuality, Expedition 33 for the first week of release was on sale on Steam for $45, making it even more a ridiculous deal for people looking for as much for their money as possible. Now, keep in mind, these are two totally different video games. Of course, Doom is a first-person action shooter, whereas Expedition 33 and Oblivion are both RPGs that you're going to dive into. I get that. I understand that. But when you're comparing a game like Doom: The Dark Ages that has about a 15 to 20 hour campaign versus Expedition 33 and Oblivion that have 60 hours plus of content, I think it's safe to say that people who are a little bit price conscious are perhaps going to go for the other game if it even remotely interests them. Because keep in mind, when we're talking about Steam, for example, which is the numbers that we are describing, these are not Game Pass players. And if they are, their Steam profiles are filled with games that they decided they wanted to take home and they wanted to add to their library instead of just being used on Game Pass. So it seems as if Doom is not one of those games that people want to ultimately take home. Now, don't get it twisted. It still has about 30 some odd thousand players at the time of launch. It has a concurrent player base of that amount, and it probably has around 200,000 to 300,000 sales on Steam. But to be fair, the game is getting absolutely destroyed by other games that were considered flops and still are till this day. It's not even just being considered flops, they have been guaranteed to be flops. You have Dragon Age: The Veilguard that hit a concurrent number of 89,000. The game flopped, right? You have Assassin's Creed Shadows. They hit a concurrent player base of 64,000 on Steam. And that game is currently still, to this day, trying to convince you that it didn't flop. But they never once gave you sales numbers because we all know that it did. So if those games were flops, what the hell is this game, Doom: The Dark Ages, at 30,000 going to be considered? Now, keep in mind, the budget for this Doom game is probably much lower than those games for a multitude of reasons. This game only has a campaign, and that is literally it. It has some reused assets, obviously, because it is still Doom at the end of the day, and they have enemies that have been reused from previous games, so they saved money there. Of course, they're going to be able to reuse certain assets to kind of lower the cost of this particular game. So I don't think their budget is nowhere near as high as the previous games mentioned. There were massive flops, nor was it in development for nowhere near as long as the games we just mentioned. But at the end of the day, this particular game is only at barely above 30,000 on Steam, so for all intents and purposes, for just the Steam numbers anyway, it is considered a pretty heavy flop when Eternal was over 100,000 players easy. So let's talk about what actually happened, right? Let's talk about some changes. Let's look at the gameplay necessarily. The Dark Ages took a bold risk. Instead of futuristic Mars landscapes and hellish portals, which to be fair, the hellish portals come later, we're in a medieval world with gothic castles, dragons, and a mace. Yes, a mace, with the idea is bold and stylistically unique. It seems to have alienated a portion of its fan base. The core loop feels slower. The weapons, while creative, lack the snappy, fluid violence that Doom Eternal mastered. Many players on Reddit and Steam forums have called the game experimental in the wrong direction. They miss the speed, the platforming, the frenetic energy, and the Dark Ages feels like a different franchise, just wearing Doom's honor. This creative pivot might have cost them their core audience. One of the biggest issues that I have personally with this game is just the overall toning down of the game. It's so obvious. Anybody that's played Doom: The Dark Ages can easily see that it is a toned down version of Doom. If you look at the glory kills, they are completely different. You're just going to have a kick here and a smack there. The only time you're ever going to have a glory kill look like some of the older ones is in a cutscene when you have no control over it anyway. If you look at gameplay from Doom Eternal, you'll notice that the glory kills are way more violent. You will snap people's necks, you will rip them apart. But in Doom: The Dark Ages, doesn't really happen that often. Every once in a while, you might get something a little bit fun. For the most part, you're just going to do a simple kick and a simple smack, and you will send them on their way. It is nowhere near as hardcore as the previous ones. But here's the interesting twist regarding Doom: The Dark Ages. It's also on Game Pass, which is part of the conversation. It has to be. And this is where things get a little bit murky. On Xbox and PC Game Pass, the game is seeing a decent player base. Not explosive, but steady. For many, the subscription made it easier to try the game without having to pay $70. But this raises the question, was Game Pass cannibalizing the PC sales? And to be honest with you, I don't think so. To be fair, a lot of potential buyers may have skipped Steam entirely, opting to play through their subscription service, maybe. Microsoft does own Bethesda after all, so Game Pass is a natural home for first-party titles now. But while Game Pass helps boost exposure, it does little to drive direct revenue. This could be part of why The Dark Ages feels like commercial letdown, even if total engagement is moderate. But for me personally, I just don't believe that Game Pass cannibalized this game, because we have seen other games that are just as good as this game. And keep in mind, this game is a good game. I have completed this game. I am almost near platinum on this game, and I want to be very clear, it is not a bad game at all. We are just comparing it to the history of Doom overall, but the game is actually pretty good. But I gotta be honest with you, I just don't believe it to be $70 good. I just don't. And I feel like a lot of people will feel the exact same way once they start seeing reviews about the game, gameplay about the game, and start formulating their opinions about it. They're gonna probably be mostly in the same camp. So now let's talk about price and competition. Doom the Dark Ages did launch at a full $70 price tag, and as mentioned earlier, Expedition 33, which is an amazing RPG, very deep in lore, and Oblivion Remastered, which is a beloved fan favorite with massive nostalgia appeal, both launched at just $50. That is $20 difference, and for many gamers, that $20 is the difference between buying now or waiting for a sale. It's a big ask for a game that doesn't hit the same highs as its predecessors. Players compared and voted with their wallets, and Doom unfortunately did lose. So what does this mean for Doom as a franchise? I mean, the brand is strong, but this is not something that's invincible. I don't think Doom is untouchable. The Dark Ages might not be a full-on failure, but it clearly marks a downturn for id Software. If id Software and Microsoft are paying attention, they'll take this as a sign that future entries should be less experimental, more polished, and perhaps better aligned with fan expectations of what they want from the Doom franchise. The franchise can still recover, but it'll require a return to core combat feel, smarter platform pricing, and perhaps a careful consideration of what players actually want from Doom. It also raises questions about the strategy of pushing every game onto Game Pass. Sure, it's great for engagement, but what happens when sales tank as a result? What happens if people didn't actually take your game home as much as you thought they would? That you ended up being the one that was rented the most and not the one that was bought the most. I think what id Software and Bethesda overall and Microsoft should do is they should look at this and they should say, what was it that in Doom the Dark Ages that people actually enjoyed, and what was it that people actually did not like? For me personally, I feel like the biggest deterrent for people are probably going to be the parry mechanic. I think the parry mechanic is going to be a hit or miss for a lot of people, depending on the type of gamer that is playing the game. For me personally, I love parry mechanics. I love dodge mechanics. I love all of that stuff. So for me, the parry mechanic was a lot of fun, but the problem is that it did slow down gameplay. When I would parry enemies, it would create a slowing effect where the enemy didn't seem to be affected by the slowing as much as the Slayer was. So you were slowed down, but the enemy was still moving at a relative normal pace. So when you would go for the melee combo, which they encourage you to do after the parry, you end up with a situation where the melee combo does not go through, or you don't get the opportunity because you were just too slow. The combat gets slowed down tremendously because of it, and they heavily emphasize it. The shield becomes a big part of Doom the Dark Ages, and it has its moments where it's a lot of fun. Shield charge is amazing. Shield throw makes you feel like Captain America with a gun. It is fantastic, but it just does slow down gameplay compared to some of the older Dooms, especially when the previous Dooms were a lot more violent, a lot more gory, a lot more bloody, and you just don't get any of that very much in this game. Sure, the guns make you feel strong and powerful, but I'm telling you, those glory kills are nowhere near the same as they used to be. So overall, Doom the Dark Ages is a very ambitious game. I think that much is pretty clear. Ambition alone, unfortunately, just doesn't guarantee success. In trying to reinvent the wheel, id Software may have alienated their fan base. Combine that with poor Steam performance, strong competition at better prices, and the Game Pass paradox, you've got a game that, while it's not a total disaster, it's definitely an underperformer. I don't think id Software really saw this coming, and I am sure that Microsoft has given them a chunk of money in order to put their game on Game Pass. I believe this is part of their contract with working with Microsoft. Hopefully it is enough for them to utilize, because again, as I mentioned earlier, I don't think this game had a budget as high as Veilguard, and I don't think it had a budget nowhere near as high as Assassin's Creed Shadows. That much I could pretty much guarantee. So the requirement of what they need to be at in order to be considered profitable is a lot lower than those two video games. That is probably why not a lot of people are reporting this game as a massive failure just yet, even though the numbers are so much lower than two games that are considered massive failures. So we'll see what ends up happening with Doom as a franchise, but I do think they need to go back to the basics and realize what is it that made people love Doom in the first place. And that's just simply ripping and tearing until it's done. So what do you guys think overall? Do you think Doom is going to recover from this? Do you think that PC players are just alienating Doom? What about the fact that physical editions of Doom just quite frankly didn't actually be physical editions? The fact that Doom had a disc that only had 80 megabytes of data on it and required you to download 85 gigs of data when you actually inserted the disc, meaning that you didn't actually have a full physical edition even though you thought you bought one. Things like this really hurt the overall perception of Doom the Dark Ages. Do you think that this was a major factor in the reason why this game wasn't purchased? You can let me know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. Special shout out to the Bigot Army members for becoming members. I appreciate you guys. And if you are not a member, of this channel, consider hitting that join button and become a Bigot Army member to get your name on the list. I would greatly appreciate it. Shout out to all of you for watching this video. Like, share, subscribe, comment. Let me know what you thought, and I will see you guys on the next one. Hypnotic out.